I'm Matt Brooker, trading as Disraeli, and this is a special video for 2000 AD covers uncovered. Previously on 2000 AD Prog 1835 Stickleback cover, I did lots and lots of tiny little roughs. I came up with designs that had big red arrows through them. I did lots of drawing very quickly. And I used the lasso tool to make lots of pretty patches of colour. So now the cover looks like this, and we're ready to add the textures that will make a Stickleback cover look like a Stickleback cover. So here we are, we've got the file open in Adobe Photoshop. You can see here the blocks of colour that I've made, and on layers above those are the shading and pencils. Now, using that shading as a guide, I'm going to draw in areas with the lasso tool that I'm going to want to be dark on the final drawing. On an ordinary pen and ink drawing, these areas would be black, but because it's the Stickleback technique, these are going to be filled with texture. You'll notice that the selection I'm making is taking in both Stickleback's hair and the top of his hat. They're both the same colour, so I'll be able to fill them at the same time. Once I've defined this area using the lasso tool, I'll use the paint bucket tool to fill the area with texture. There's a checkbox in the paint bucket tool controls called Use All Layers. If I check that, the colour blocks on a lower layer will constrain the texture fill on an upper layer. I have to switch off the shading first to stop it interfering with the process. So the next thing I'm going to do is pick a texture for the paint bucket tool. Here we go. If you don't have Use All Layers checked, this is what happens. The texture fill's constrained by the selection, but it's not really going where we want it to. So let's undo that and try again. This time with Use All Layers checked, and you can see how the fill is being constrained both by the color blocks and by the selection. Gives you a lot more control. Now actually we want this fill to be transparent, so I'll undo that and make the layer transparent by setting it to multiply and then redo the fill. What we'll do now is we'll speed this up so you can see a bit more of the effect in action. I'm underfilling the textures with grey using Select, Load Selection, Select Layer Transparency. In the full version of Photoshop, you can set that up as an action, so instead of having to go through all the menus, I just tap a function key. And now you've seen how the basic technique works, let's have a look at some more complicated stuff. The texture I use for shading is omnidirectional, but certain things like wood grain or brickwork are directional. They have to go a particular way around. Now with the Stickleback technique I'm being quite abstract, so I'm not trying to map the textures accurately to the perspective or volume of objects in the way that a 3D modeler is, but nevertheless it just looks better if certain textures go in certain directions. So here I'm going to create a radiating wood grain effect on the end of Black Bob's cudgel. And first I'm going to draw a selection and I'm going to fill it with a wood grain pattern I've already got set up. Thus. Command plus I inverts the pattern and makes it dark. I want it as a sort of dark shading effect. I'm just using a shortcut to fade the texture down temporarily so I can see what I'm doing more easily. I'm going to move the selection with the texture down to where I want it, covering one of the branches. Then holding Alt and pulling duplicates the texture on the same layer. Command plus T shortcut creates a transformation box which allows me to rotate the texture and move it around. I'm going to repeat this now to create a radiating spoke effect. When I'm done, I will return the textures to full opacity, and then I'll hide the layer for a moment so I can select what's underneath it. I'm using the magic wand to grab the roots at the end of the cudgel. If I turn this into a quick mask, you'll be able to see it more clearly in red. There we go. And then I'll show the texture again. And then all I do is click the layer mask icon at the bottom of the layers palette. What that's done is to hide everything on that layer that was outside the selection you could see. It's a very quick way of just cutting things out. The only drawback to it is that it affects everything on the whole layer, so you have to make sure that your texture or whatever else is sitting on a layer of its own. The thing about the Stickleback technique is it's visually very busy, so it's actually difficult to make images that read properly. You're always having to struggle for clarity. What I'm going to do now is add some grey tones to push the background back a little and help pop the foreground figures forward. Being as it's Stickleback, these greys are going to be textures, not just flat colour. To get the effect I want, I'm going to use a mixture of flat colour, brush strokes and textures applied with the paint bucket tool. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the background area that I want and then fill it with a light grey colour using Edit Fill. And if I switch the white background on, you can see already how it's starting to push that background back a bit. I'm now going to pick a texture brush. I've made myself a variety of different ones of these over the years by sampling either scans or photographs of different textures. Rather cleverly, I actually managed to start working off the area that I was screen grabbing, so I'm afraid much of what I'm going to do in the next few seconds isn't visible. This does give me time to explain that everything goes onto separate layers, so as you can see here with me switching on and off, the texture that I've just added is on its own layer and can either be removed entirely or I can adjust the opacity of the layer to change the effect. And now I'm adding a sort of sponge texture to darken down the background even further. I'm judging this by eye really. I've got a rough idea where I'm going, but basically I'll know it when I see it. The important thing is that the foreground characters stand out as clearly as possible from that busy, complicated background. You can also use a texture brush loaded with white to lighten some of the areas back up. I'm going to switch off the greys for a minute, hide them so that I can add a layer of transparent texture to the background. This is using the paint bucket tool and it's on a layer set to about 50% opacity and multiply, so it's transparent but it's also faded down a bit. Finally, I'm using the gradation tool on a layer mask to just fade out some of the texture towards the bottom of the picture. So now let's jump forward a little bit. This is what the cover looks like now that I've added these greys to all the areas that I want to work on. By adding these chunks of greys, I've made the image look much clearer than it did before. There are two steps left now. One is to intensify the blacks, and the other one is to take the cover into Coral Painter and add some painting and fine detail to just finish it off. And that will be the subject of the next video. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you'll find it useful. This has been a special video presentation for 2000 AD Covers Uncovered, 2000adcovers.blogspot.com. See you in the funny pages.